Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. India's labor laws have often been blamed for the slow growth in the manufacturing sector, among other things. But the Modi government's move to reform these laws seem to have the potential to change just that. Joining me today to discuss the recent reforms and also the impact of this on the industry, we have Rishi Agarwal and Ashish Chandorkar. Rishi is the CEO of Avantis RegTech, a SaaS firm based in Pune. His firm helps clients simplify the maze of labor compliance at national and state levels. He writes regularly for ORF and other media outlets on this subject, and his research has been widely used in the last few weeks, especially by the government agencies and public policy commentators alike. So, welcome, Rishi. Thanks so much for making the time.
Roshan, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ashish, you've heard before on multiple episodes of Bharat Varta. He's a regular guest of ours. People mention their interests are diverse, but I doubt they would be as diverse as Ashish's interests, from politics to policy to Poha, right? So he's an author and a columnist. Good to have you back, Ashish. I see that we're matching shirts today.
Yeah, I mean, quite a coincidence. So the shirt matches with your shirt, Carrie, and Rishi is also from Indore, so also a Poha lover in the house. So
Wow. Matching on many different levels. So fantastic that we're all on the same page even before we get started. So, right. So before we delve into the specifics of the labor laws as such, I think it would be helpful to understand how the laws have thus far impacted economic growth as such, right? And maybe we can start with you, Rishi. And then Ashish can add his comments later. So we can begin with you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Roshan. The way, Roshan, I look at India, I look at two Indias, right? There is a formal India and then there is an informal India. The formal India has access to debt and equity capital. It pays income tax and GST. It has access to technology. It has access to talent. It has access to domestic and international markets. It invests in developing and training its people and making them more productive. It is highly resilient and adaptable. It recovers better and faster from the economic shocks, hires hundreds and thousands of formal employees, pays social security. On the other hand, we talk about informal India. It hires under 5 employees each, doesn't have easy access to timely debt and equity capital. As a result, they don't have access to good technology. They can't invest in training and developing talent. They don't pay social security. They don't have easy access to domestic and international markets. They don't have economies of scale. Hence, they produce goods and services that are not very competitive domestically or internationally. Unfortunately, of the 63 million enterprises that we have in India, 62 million are in the latter category. And they languish primarily because of a concept of formalization tax. The moment an enterprise in India goes from informal to formal, the number of licenses, registrations, permissions, consent orders, returns, registers, challans, payments, notices, displays, and I can go on rattling more items on the compliance, they shoot through the roof. The cost of compliance shoots up, and in the recent years, the cost of poor compliance has also shot up. And that is a big reason why India has created a disproportionately large number of micro enterprises which have remained stunted and they have failed to grow.
Right. Ashish, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Is the archaic laws, why, as Rishi mentioned, 62 out of the 63 million possible enterprises are in the informal realm of things, and I think roughly about 70,000 of them, have less than a turnover of 5 crores. Is that part of the reason as well?
Yeah, actually, it's the other way around, Carrie. So only 70,000 have turnover more than 5 crores. Everyone else is under 5 crores in turnover.
Sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Rishi probably covered all of the issues which we see today, but I think labor laws probably specifically outside of the whole compliance regime and etc. also had their own antiquities in terms of how they were structured, right? So if you go back to the history of labor laws, first of all, I mean, there were 44 central codes. Some of them have been abolished in the last few years or have been like as part of the various abolition acts which have been brought in by the Modi government. So some were no longer valid, but there have been fairly the main acts have been there. Also, because labor is a concurrent subject, states make their own laws. So on top of, I think Rishi will talk about this more because he has done phenomenal research on the subject. But the laws at the state level could be even more onerous, right? And then you can actually go one level deeper and say that even municipalities sometimes create their own bottlenecks. So it's not just the central laws per se; it is the web of the complex web across multiple levels, which is the real issue. And specifically, labor was a problem because they were very limiting in terms of the way they were structured, right? So there could be differences between, let's say, manufacturing versus running e-commerce for the same manufacturing unit, right? So you may have to do two completely different types of business models, register different subsidiaries. You cannot hold a business in the same entity because the laws are very different, and you don't want the restrictive manufacturing laws to be applicable to the e-commerce business, which is a front-ending client-facing business. So there are issues like that. And then what happens is once you create a new company, obviously, as Rishi said, the compliances then go up. And I mean, creating a company itself is a problem even today in India. So I think broadly speaking, while there were several legal issues, the labor laws were probably a good component of that. I mean, I would say more than 50% of the problems that we have faced were on the account of the labor laws.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Ashish, for that background. Rishi, now moving on to the specifics of the laws itself, right? What exactly has changed with the 4 labor codes that were introduced?
So I think before I answer that question, Roshan, let me take a step back here and ask a more fundamental question. Who do India's labor laws serve, right? They neither serve the labor nor they serve the employer. They actually serve the inspectors and the intermediaries who you can call as labor consultants.
The trade unions and so on.
Absolutely. Let's deconstruct this a little bit and examine it further. So before we answer whether the 4 codes are going to change the landscape, let's understand what is wrong with India's labor laws today, right? So the first one is that they only provide coverage to 15% of the India's labor and employee base. Vast majority of India's labor, which is 85%, somewhere in that range, is not covered by the current labor laws. That's the first and the fundamental problem. There is no coverage for gig workers, work from home workers, home-based workers, freelancers. All of them are not covered right here. Any micro enterprises with 10 employees and under are not covered. There's absolutely no provision for fixed term employment, right? So there are only 2 kinds of employees. Either you can be a full-term employee, full-time permanent employee, or you can be a contract employee. The current laws do not provide any flexibility in expanding or shrinking your capacity on manufacturing in line with the dynamic demand and supply cycles. You know, this converts labor into a fixed cost for doing business in India. Then there are too many licenses, registrations, and consent orders, right? You want to start a company, there are about 27 in all, and many of them fall into the labor category. Then there are multiplicity of returns and registers with significant amount of redundancy, duplication, overlap. There are at least 2,745 different forms and formats which are required across the length and breadth between central and state laws. Then there are various authorities who are responsible for enforcement of these laws. There are various kinds of inspectors. There are at least 12 to 13 different inspectors that can come unannounced at any point in time in a small Indian enterprise. Then there are different applicability thresholds for these labor laws, right? ESI becomes applicable with 10 and above. PF will become applicable at 20 and above. Industrial Disputes Act had a threshold of 100 and above. So the thresholds keep changing thereof. Then there are too many permutations of minimum wages. Take a state of Karnataka as an example. Today, there are 72 scheduled job types. There are 5 different skill levels, 4 different zones. Do the math, Roshan. You'll find that there are over 1,000 permutations and combinations just of minimum wages. And when you go through the list, you will find that there are just a few cents and paisas here and there. Do we really need so many different permutations and combinations of minimum wages in the country? That's a question that I often ask. Then there's hardly any digitization. There's so much physical interaction when you're taking a new license or a registration or you're making a filing. There is too much interaction between the employer and government, and that creates opportunities for corruption and rent seeking. There are many different definitions of employees. Some definitions include managers and supervisors, some exclude managers and supervisors, some include HRA, some don't include HRA. I mean, there are so many different definitions of wages which are covered. Then there are unions which can go on strike without any intimation. that can jeopardize your business. All of these are fundamental problems. They've been there festering in our labor laws. A number of these labor laws were created during the colonial regime. Trade Union Act of 1926, Employee Compensation Act of 1923. All of these are acts which were created at a point in time. And decades have gone by. Everybody has cribbed and complained, but we still haven't gone ahead and made the change. And I'm so happy today the changes are starting to unfold.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Rishi, because oftentimes when I look at this, it always resembles a Bollywood movie of the 70s or whatever, where the, businessman is the villain in the entire thing, right? And Ashish, Rishi brings up an important point, which is that, the laws don't really serve anyone, right? Typically a business kind of views all of this as a cost center. And if you just add these disproportionately, there is really no incentive for the businessmen or the other stakeholders involved, except maybe the people, who are like the inspectors or the unions, to really do anything about this, right?
No, absolutely. And I think going back to your original point, Gary, there were like 44 central laws, of which 29 have been subsumed now into the 4 different codes. So from 1200 sections, we have come down to 479 sections. So the fact is that to track some of these things and basically use them productively, and as Rishi rightly pointed out, the applicability of the laws itself is to a very small set of population. It won't be more than 10-15% of the working population of India. However, whichever way you define formalization, right? And also even within that, how many people actually make use of those laws, in the sense that even if it was applicable to you and me, like, what is the probability that we know what the law is and what needs to be done to get it enforced in a logical context? Basically, it becomes a rent-seeking tendency. And when you have 1200 sections and the ability of inspectors to walk in, that becomes a challenge in itself, right? We are down to 479 sections now. We need to still see what the actual rules are within the 4 codes, which are the code on wages, which was passed last year by both houses of the parliament. And then we had codes on industrial relations, occupational safety, health and working conditions, and then the social security code. So this the laws will be framed between now and December by the Labour Ministry. One good thing I see is that a lot of the thresholds or numerical numbers or applicability to sectors has been parameterized. So it is not hard-coded in the legislation, in the sense that, just to take the most obvious and the easiest example, the threshold at which you can fire, a firm can fire employees if things are not going well for the business, is now up to 300. This was hard-coded in the law earlier at 100 in the central law. Some states had revised it to 300 already, but from a central perspective, it was still 100. So every time if the law had to change, it had to go via the parliament. Now the code says that the current threshold is 300, and it can be it can be administratively changed by the government as needed, right? So a lot of those changes have been brought in, where it is not just a simplification for today, it is also simplification for future, which is that it is a bit like railway budget, right? By not having the railway budget and by subsuming it under the union budget, now no one really cares. That there is no railway budget. When it first went away 4 years ago or 5 years ago, there was a lot of furor as to how can you survive without a railway budget. But now it's the same thing for these laws. There'll be some 6 months of furor over this also, but what will happen is that things can keep changing later on without really any big bang noise about it, because it will be all administrative in nature.
Ashish, just a quick point on. Just a quick point on that number 300, right? Any special significance to that? Why not 500?
So basically, I think only about 6-7% of the enterprises in India employ more than 300 people. So it's just a threshold which kind of determines the really large companies in India. And I think those companies generally speak. I think the cost of central compliance is not that big an issue, in the sense that people have got used to it. The large companies have got used to it. But the issue really happens at the lower level, as Rishi said, like, inspectors can walk in. Now that's a challenge because, that could be very extortionist, especially as you go in the remote areas. Like if you're sitting in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, you can still make a noise. You can call media 2 days later. You can, get some PR done about how you are not doing the wrong thing. But if you were sitting 500 kilometers from Mumbai in Maharashtra, or 500 kilometers north of Bangalore, there will be no recourse if, let's say, there was an extortionist tendency demonstrated by a state inspector. So I think that while the number 300 is a bit like a bit of a guesswork in terms of where the number of employees which are there in most of the large firms. It is also like a future-proof threshold for smaller companies in smaller places, because they are highly unlikely to get to 300 number even if they grow. I mean, a lot of them are anyway under 10 people right now formally, because of they don't want to get into the ACIC rules and so on. So even if they grow, it will take several years for them to get to 300. So in that sense, it's more of a future proofing as well.
Right.
So I'll add a comment here, Roshan, to what Ashish mentioned here, in terms of the fact that we have moved the power from legislative to executive, and this is going to help make things faster in the future. And I'll give you a perspective of how the current labor codes have been, the history of some of these, right? So National Commission, the second National Commission of Labor was formed in year 1999 by the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. 2002 is when the report was submitted. In 2002, there was a recognition of the fact that we have a little bit of a chaotic labor laws and we need reform. There were 4 codes proposed by Second National Commission for Labor back in 2002. Today, 18 years later, in the current month, we have seen the change really unfold. And the reason it has happened is it needed to go through the legislature. 10 years of previous government came through, didn't happen. 5 years of NDA government came through. They didn't have the numbers to push them through the Rajya Sabha, and hence they lost the flexibility in making the change. The speed gets compromised. Years go by and millions who could come out of the poverty lines sit on the border. So I think one of the fundamental shifts has happened is to bring about that change where the power has moved from legislative to executive to keep them in tune with the times, to make modifications as required, so that we don't have to wait another 18 years to see a major change in threshold values.
Right. I'm actually reminded of that old Thomas Sowell quote about enabling wealth creators, right? And the government really stepping out of the way, basically. Rishi, we're also operating in exceptional times. I mean, obviously, we're under siege by the pandemic. How have the rigid labor laws impacted businesses specifically at this point of time?
So, very interesting question, Roshan. And COVID is unprecedented. Not just for the current generation, but my father's and my grandfather's generation. None of them have seen a humanitarian crisis as bad as COVID. While the formal enterprises have just gotten by, a lot of them had access to debt and equity capital. They continued to pay salaries. They continued to somehow keep producing. And they showed a lot of resilience and responsiveness in adapting to these situations. And most of them have survived. So the number that I threw earlier was there are 70,000 companies in India with revenues greater than 5 crores. And if you see what has happened, a lot of those, in fact, I would say a vast majority of those 70,000, while they have gone through a financial stress, but they have continued to survive. None of them have gone belly up. Whereas when you move to the 62 million enterprises which are in the informal sector and look at the state of affairs there was a recent statistic where 40% of the startups have closed down. Almost 45 to 50% of the restaurants may never open shutters once the economy comes back to normal. A lot of these enterprises, they have fired their fewer people. We have seen the migrant labor crisis unfold. Most of them were working in informal and micro enterprise sectors, didn't have money to go back home. So COVID has wreaked disaster, havoc. Unfortunately, because of the vast majority of our enterprises in the informal sector, with poor resilience and poor access to working capital, they have borne most of the brunt of COVID.
Right. So Ashish, was this the right time for these reforms? I mean, we've seen similar reforms on the agriculture side as well. So COVID sort of acting like an accelerating function for all of these reforms. Decades' work happening in a matter of few weeks.
So, Carrie, see, there's a saying in Delhi that you should never waste a good crisis when it comes to Indian policy making, right? I think this was one of the moments where I think government was doing different things even earlier in terms of simplification of the Boiler Act and some of the changes happening on the even on the labor compliance side. Although things were slow, and because this was very state-driven subject like agriculture, the central intervention was more as a construct and more as a framework rather than a specific lawmaking. What has happened with this with the pandemic is that the central government has decided to essentially use the more the hammer approach here in terms of using its authority on the concurrent list and passing through legislations which are much more far-reaching in impact, and which the states cannot nullify that easily. I mean, they will of course try. Some of them will certainly try that also, but it may be real difficult compared to what it used to be earlier. So, and also, like as Rishi said, this was actually initiated, like a lot of things which Modi government is completing, this was initiated by the Vajpayee government. In fact, it's almost like, there was a blip of some 10, 15 years in between, and then we are now catching up with some of these things, including the GST also, started around those times. So I think that whole formalization aspect has already taken a lot of time, in which we have wasted the most productive year of globalization between 2004 and 2009, when the world grew on high octane and a lot of businesses started in India. We actually probably did not leverage the full power of formalization in those years. Now, of course, the world may never be globalized as much as it was during that era. So, if not today, then when, right? So, there is a problem. There are structural changes needed. There are short-term changes also needed, definitely, but certainly a structural change done now, which may cause some grief in the, let's say, coming year, couple of years. And we discussed this on the agricultural reform episodes also, that things may not look good for the next 2-3 years, but basically, I mean, there will be a hockey stick effect, hopefully, of the reforms in future. Future in India is always unpredictable because people always find ways to circumvent whatever good is happening. So it might take, let's say, a few years, let's say. I think this is much more foolproof than some of the other areas, given that this is more directional in nature. And by not codifying a lot of stuff, government has done a good job by keeping it flexible. So they can keep changing it and keep tweaking it even later if things do not fall in place.
Right. Rishi, I want to talk to you specifically about the compliance aspect of things. Do you think that will become any easier going forward? I mean, you mentioned the lack of digitization and so on earlier, but I guess now there is really no choice, right, but to go digital.
Yes.
Maybe you could speak about your specific example with experience with Avantis.
Sure. So let's take a look at numbers. I mean, numbers don't have emotions, and I love numbers, Kerry, here. So there are about 1,536 acts in India that affect formal enterprises. In these 1,536 acts, you're dealing with about 69,233 compliances, which lead to about 6,618 filings. These numbers are across central, state, and local laws. There are 3 levels in India. These numbers are across 7 broad categories of compliances. So when you look at compliances, labor laws are one of the 7 categories, important category, but one of the 7. The second is finance and taxation, which deals with direct taxes, indirect taxes, customs, FEMA, and so on and so forth. Then you have commercial laws that deal with equipment, hoists, lifts, pressure vessels, boilers, cranes, weighing equipment. These are all commercial equipment. Having each of these equipments has compliance ramifications. Ashish already alluded to boiler as an example. There are specific licenses and registrations, specific maintenance of registers, specific testing that you may need to do on each one of these when you have them. Then there is environmental health and safety, popularly known as EHS. So these are laws which are in as a part of Environment Protection Act of 1986, solid waste management, hazardous waste management, e-waste management, batteries rules, air, water, and soil pollutions. All of these are examples of acts under environment, health, and safety. And they broadly have CPCB, which is Central Pollution Control Board, and state pollution control boards as the primary authorities. Then you have secretarial laws, which deal with company law matters like MCA, like SEBI, and for listed companies, BSE, and SEBI. Then you have industry-specific regulations, which are pertaining to specific industries. So when you deal with food processing, you have FSSAI. When you deal with insurance, there is a regulator called IRDAI. When you have banking, shadow banking, NBFCs, you deal with RBI. When you talk about telecom, there is TRAI, and so on. And then last but not the least is a general category, which deals with Gram Panchayat specific filings and returns, which don't fall into any of these, or municipal corporation specific returns, or SEZ or STPI kind of areas, which don't fall into the other 6 categories. So when you look at the compliance universe of India, you're dealing with all of this. Labor laws, particularly, there are 463 acts out of 1,536 acts. They make about 30% of the overall population. These 463, they lead to about 32,542 compliances, which are about almost 47% of the overall compliance load. So this is really what Indian enterprises deal with. Now, no single enterprise deals with all of these. This is the universe of the country. But a mid-sized enterprise in the country operating with about 4 to 5 plants in India they deal with about 5,000 to 6,000 compliances in a year. And not just that, the compliance environment in India is highly dynamic. It changes 3,000 times a year. These changes are published on over 2,230 websites across central, state, and local departments. And as you know, the websites that we have in the government are not the most sophisticated. To find any piece of information probably requires 10, 15 different clicks, trying to go through many menu items. Some of them have been archived, some of them don't work. And for a mid-sized company, you're dealing with 100 to 200 changes which are relevant to them at any given point in time. And these have compliance implications. So this is really what Indian enterprises deal with from a compliance perspective. And labor laws, as I said, is of almost 47% of it. And we are hoping that with all the reforms that are currently unfolding, this 47% will get affected. And this is going to see a significant reduction. How much reduction? Time will tell, because so far we have only seen the codes. Rules are awaiting notification. Like Ashish pointed out, November and December is the time frame when we expect the rules to be notified. But the writing is on the wall that from almost 1,400 plus sections across 29 that have been subsumed and 15 which have been repealed, we are now coming down to 480 sections. There is a 67% reduction in simply the number of sections. And that is a proxy for how much reduction in compliance burden that you can expect. And I am clearly expecting between 50 to 70% give or take reduction in the compliance burden. And this includes licenses, registrations, permissions, consent orders, number of different kinds of returns, registers, and challans. And I'll give you an example here, Carrie. Just the number of registers, a small enterprise in the country with about 100 people today maintains 48 different registers. And a lot of them are labor registers. Just under the Factories Act, there are 14 different registers that are required. You would not believe that just the wage register has about 8 to 10 different formats in various acts. The accident, something as simple as accident, there are at least 4 to 5 different formats. There are different formats for muster rolls, leave and attendance registers, fines and deduction registers, advance registers. All of these have so many different forms and formats just in a single state, because you're dealing with multiple authorities. And what codification will do definitely is to bring this burden down. You will not need to maintain 10 different wage registers as an example. One wage register will do. So I'm quite hopeful that what we are seeing is going to significantly bring down the compliance burden.
Yeah, the numbers just boggle the mind, you know. I mean, as I'm listening to these numbers, that metaphor of the villain is slowly shifting in my head to the hero's ailing mother or something, right? I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Ashish, I want to talk to you about how these will help us be future ready, so to speak, right? I mean, you mentioned a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And obviously the future is going to see more of remote work, more of gig work, and plenty of the things to that effect, right? Which may not have had a precedent before. So do you think these laws will make us more future ready?
Yeah. So I see 3 important changes, Carrie, which make me hopeful that we will be future ready. One is that the whole parameterization aspect, which I already spoke about, that things are much more simplified. I mean, there are the difference between code and an act is that codes will have specific laws, which can then be keep changing. You don't have to go back to parliament to amend the acts, right? That is a basic premise here. So I think that parameterization to me is very critical, because what it means is that you will be more agile, even if there's a problem later on. You can be more agile in terms of changing it as the need arises, or as the context may be in a given year, or for the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? That is one thing. The second part is that the bigger irritants have all been taken care of. Like if you really ask a big let's say, manufacturing unit, what would they complain about? So they would complain about the hiring and firing part of the policy. They would complain about the flash strike ability of unions. They would complain about the level, the small thresholds of unionization itself, in terms of at what stage can you create a union, and can you start doing collective negotiations. So I think all of this has been balanced a fair bit in terms of the modern requirements, and to make enterprises aligned with the general global types, the way global firms work. The third and the most important part, and you alluded to that, Carrie, is that the nature of labor itself is changing. Perhaps my generation is the last one where people would think of long-term employment as a, like staying in the same company for a long time, or being in the same job for 5, 10, 15 years. So these could be very archaic concepts in, let's say, years to come. And I think the good thing is that this part has been addressed in the in the codes. The Social Security Act talks about some social security net for gig, unorganized, and self-employed workers. The unfortunate part is that there's some complication there, because in certain, I wrote an article on Swaraj where I was pointing out that a same, let's say, a driver running his own car, working on two platforms, can actually be classified as a self-employed worker, a gig worker, and a platform worker. So there is some complexity still, which is there in the codes. But nonetheless, the fact that the codes talk about the welfare of these people is actually a good thing. It also readies the business models can be then tweaked. So, for example, if the aggregators are today being told that you need to spend 1 to 2% of your turnover, not GMV but turnover, I think that is also a very interesting thing that they mentioned the term turnover, which is a good thing. There was a lot of confusion whether they meant GMV, because that would have really killed the industry by knocking off the profitability. I mean, there is no profitability to start off, but knocking off the Californian investors, basically, right? So if they talked about GMVs. But good thing is they use the term turnover, and it is still parameterized. It is still 1 to 2%, and the exact design will be known in the next few months. So I think this is a good overall a good structure, and makes me quite optimistic that they've thought about the kind of changes which we will see in the years to come. And I think the whole concept of fixed term employment, short term contracts, and gig/platform workers will only increase from here on. I mean, the fact is India has always been a gig economy, just that it was not recognized in that sense. I mean, like as Rishi said, there are a whole bunch of people doing their own thing, right? The plumbers, carpenters, painters. They are gig workers. They just, I mean, much before someone in New York thought about a term called gig work, the entire Indian economy was running like that, right? It's just that we did not, like a lot of things which we do in India, we did not copyright it in any way. But the fact is that it may actually promote that. And this is very much in line with the Indian work ethic and the general social fabric of how employment and labor is generated in India. So I think that's a good positive sign.
Fantastic. So Rishi,
I just want to quickly come in on that. What
Yeah.
I'm really kicked about is a couple of things, right? Besides what Ashish mentioned, all of them great points. One of them is the compliance burden is going to come down dramatically. And ball is squarely in the state's court right now. But we definitely think that between 60 and 70%, somewhere between 50 and 70, give or take, is where the compliance burden is going to come down. And when you look at enterprises of the future, Roshan, which have to go and compete with the rest of the world, and if we have to attract the China refugees, I think making these fundamental changes are going to go a long way. The second big thing is, the fixed term employment that Ashish was alluding to, right? It provides a significant amount of flexibility. I recall a dialogue from, the 1970s and 80s kind of a movie that ये वो सीढ़ियां हैं जो ऊपर को जाती हैं लेकिन नीचे नहीं, right? And that's where you realize that you ask an entrepreneur to go and hire people when they need it. You have a new contract from a large retailer in the US for 2 million jeans. And for that to be done in 6 months, you need to go and ramp up quite significantly, right? But how do you ramp up? Because there is no provision to ramp down, right? You will get stuck with Industrial Disputes Act and so on and so forth. So in order to compete globally, we really need this flexibility. And I'm glad that the labor laws do accommodate for this flexibility. They have taken off the threshold values where applicability begins, right? Like gratuity, like paid leave and so on and so forth for these kinds of workers. And these are going to make us future ready as a country.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you about the same, Rishi, which is that if you had a wish list of all of the things that you would want done in the future, right? what are some of those laws that you would want changed, and what are some of those reforms that should come into being?
See, we've taken 73
Should we do
years.
a whole other podcast for that?
I'll give you a very high level outline. So we've taken 73 years to go from 44 labor acts to 4. And my wish list is we don't need 4 labor codes. We need to gravitate towards 1 at some point in the future. I would want to make sure that government doesn't specify that you need to install a spittoon in a factory and scrub the top surface of the spittoon every so often. Otherwise, you can go to 2 years of jail. I would not want government to tell us that the inside walls, inside a canteen, should be whitewashed once every 4 months. You should keep a record. And in case you have a tiled wall, you need to seek special exemption or permission. My wish list says that government should not tell me to reconstitute a canteen committee every 2 years. Otherwise, I deserve a jail for 2 years, right? So these are all areas where laws were set at a point in time. Kerry, do you know that in 1960, 1st May to be precise, Employment Exchange Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act came in. And it was great because that was a time when there was no internet, there was no technology, there were no sophisticated matching algorithms. And the only way employers and employees or prospects met was via an employment exchange. Now, cut that story, come to 2020. Nothing has changed. Every 15 days, an employer is supposed to file in a format, in some determined format, a notification of vacancies that you have. You know where it resides? In some file gathering dust. A migrant worker who forms 60 million employees in the country have no access to search, sort, filter that vacancy. They cannot apply to that vacancy. But there are 4 returns quarterly in nature that an employer is supposed to file in ER1 form today. Today, they are supposed to file those returns. To what avail? To what benefit? The compliance was created at a point in time with a specific intention. It has long lost its relevance. And in my wish list, I wish the government creates a compliance commission, a national compliance commission, empowers it so that it can work with state, center, various ministries and departments and reviews the compliance burden again. And that review should have duplication, redundancy, overlap, competing themes that are covered in various different acts. All of these need to be struck off. And I'm quite confident, Kerry, that from our experience, we can clearly see that 60 to 70% of India's compliance can go away if we go down, take that approach. I do not want government to be telling me to whitewash my canteens because that is a part of an industry operations. People do it. We need to make our industry competitive. Today, an Infosys and a Wipro, they go all out to keep their employees. Nobody needs to tell them to give hygienic conditions or make water available, and the quantity of water needs to be this multiplied by that. Number of urinals that they need to have in the bathroom needs to be X percentage of the staff. All of these, in my view, have lost their relevance. Today, employers want good employees. They are willing to go out, all out, bend over backwards, and provide safe working conditions, hygienic conditions, good job environment. We need to go in that direction rather than hold a danda to them and ask them to comply with specific regulations of this nature.
Right. So I'm going to push back a little bit, right? And ask you what would be the incentive for, let's say, a national compliance commission to reduce their relevance through making laws and, regulation simple, right? So that is one thing. And second, I would say, do you believe that, all along the podcast, what we've discussed is often the laws that come into force really hurt the workers in the end, right? Because if it is prohibitive for someone to employ these people, then he or she is not going to employ them, right? And we see this universally as well. I mean, with the law that came into force in San Francisco, for example, pertaining to gig workers and so on, right? So, your quick thoughts on both these points. Sorry, the second point, I think I didn't finish, but do you think that there should be some necessary guardrails to protect these workers as such?
So let me first answer the first question. So the vested interest will always be there. There will be a conflict of interest, as I said earlier. Today, our labor laws don't serve the labor. It doesn't serve the employer. They actually serve the intermediaries and the inspectors, right? So you will always have a scenario where vested interest will push back. But I think no change has ever been, changes are always slow and painful, right? And this is a process of a change. And this change has been taken up 73 years after our independence. So I don't expect it to go painless. But we have to push through these reforms. They make sense for everybody. They provide coverage to a larger percentage than what we provide coverage to. They help us implement the fundamental rights that have been given to our citizens by the Constitution. It reduces exploitation of all kinds, whether it is an employee exploitation or employer exploitation. So I definitely think vested interests will push back, but the National Compliance Commission will have to deal with some of this and go ahead via rationalization, simplification, decriminalization, and digitization. It will have to implement this. Otherwise, we will continue to languish at 2 trillion. The dream that we have of $5 and $10 trillion economy, Carrie, will just stay a pipe dream. So that is an important thing. And if we don't do it right now, Vietnam and other countries are taking away all the China refugees.
Right. So Ashish, I think we'll close with you. Right. So assume that you have the magic lamp with you and you could ask the genie for anything that you would want pertaining to labor and compliance, right? So, what are some things that you would like to see?
So there are 3 areas, Carrie, which I would want to be seen as a wish list on the labor front, and I think this goes beyond labor actually. Firstly, there has to be the concurrent lists have to be designed in a way that states can make a central law more liberal, but they should not be able to make it more complex. That in theory is the case with concurrent lists, but it doesn't really happen that way. Like the way the kind of, the example is on the agriculture side, where the kind of changes which some of the states are planning to circumvent the recent laws may well happen for labor laws also in 6 months' time once the rules are out for public consumption. So I think there's a fundamental rethink needed on the concurrent list as to if something is good nationally, it should be good for all the states, generally speaking. This will take a GST council type, or like as Rishi said, a national council, a compliance commission type of structure, where there's an equal participation of center and states, and the federalism works constructively. It doesn't work to undermine each other. States can compete with each other by making laws more liberal, which is perfectly fine. We saw some of that actually in the months of May and June when states like UP, MP, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra in some cases. There were a lot of changes announced which could constructively attract new investments, right? So, and that's fine. You can always argue on the validity of some of those, like UP had said that we will not have labor laws applicable at all for the next 3 years, etc. And I think Rishi had vociferously countered that in one of his ORF articles. We had discussed this, I think, on one of the past episodes of Bharat Varta as well, that the MP model was the right model to go, which actually made it genuinely liberal rather than trying to make it lopsided and it's in the favor of industrialists. So anyway, those changes are needed. I think states should compete for investments and for constructively progressing on their agenda. I think that has to be fostered by the central government in some way. I don't know whether it is practical or not, but that would be one point of wish list. Second thing is that this whole innate tendency to distrust anyone with money has to, it's an Indian DNA thing, because a lot of these laws emanate from the thought process that the industrialist is a chore and he's out there to basically exploit the workers. If you go back to the Bollywood of 1970s and the whole angry young man image which Amitabh created was actually out of this precisely the same operating structure, that the Malik was always a chore and he was there to exploit the workers in the factory, and basically then a savior rises from the like from the ashes, like Phoenix rising from the ashes, and then he saves the world from these corrupt people. Sometimes a person can be so bad that but he has to become a smuggler or a gunda himself, and for which he repents later on, but he still saves the world, right? So I think that was a construct which, it ran for decades in Bollywood because of the innate assumption that all industrialists were out there to harm the workers. The third part is that the digitization part has to really kick in some of these industries, in some of the government processes, right? The fact is that we have come a long way. There are several wonderful examples like the government e-marketplace or the UPI payments. A government catalyzed ecosystem of digital, let's say, utilities can really go very far. The amount of power and the reach a government has, no private level will have it in terms of aggregation capability. that if it has to be applied, I mean, Rishi actually works in that space where, you know, you're using a platform to make multiple filings, etc. But imagine that a same company working in, let's say, 5 states may have 5 different types of forms to fill. There could be some one field here and there which could be different across the different states, right? So you may have to compute something. Rules could be different across two offices in 2 different states, right? Some of this portability has to come in. I mean, there has to be some level of parameterization even in the compliance process, where once you file in a central database, the states should be able to pull stuff from whatever they need. I mean, if they need more stuff, then let the company file it once in a central place, right? So let there be like one grand filing, which could be easier. And then let the companies pull let the states pull what they want, I mean, from that one database, right? And that, by the way, is not unheard of. I mean, in a way, like the income tax works today like that. I mean, you know, a whole bunch of people are reporting stuff into a
DigiLocker as well,
database.
right?
And when you file returns, you actually see things populated in Form 26As. So when you can do it at a retail level, well, when there are 8 crore taxpayers in India, why can't you do it at a company level, where there are only 6 crore companies today, and some of them do not fall under any real thresholds, right? I mean, like Kirana Wala is not going to go file a whole bunch of returns. He's only got one entity in one place. So the real complexity is only for a few thousand companies. I mean, maybe a few lakh companies, let's say. But if that can be really made easy, of course, it will put Rishi out of business, which is a different thing. But the fact is that that would be my wish list. That let Rishi do much more productive stuff for the country rather than trying to sort out labor compliances.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, Ashish. A couple of things I just want to add to that. I think many of these laws, seem like they've been created for the exceptions, but, it applies to the rule, right? It applies to 100% or 95% of the people who may not really be required to be under the purview of that. Second, the fact that, a lot of these stifle innovation as well. And, with newer forms of businesses evolving, like we discussed this on a FinTech episode before as well. Startups are agile, they're innovating on different solutions, and oftentimes they have to work in cohesion with the policymakers and so on. So given all of those constraints, I think it will be helpful to have a less is more approach. And yeah, finally, I mean, would love to get that, typical stereotype of the businessman being the chore out of public memory as such, right? So that we can move on to a bright and wonderful future. So this has been a fascinating deep dive, Rishi and Ashish. Thank you so much. I think a lot of rich and insightful information you guys have shared. Right. I'm sure our audience will appreciate this nuanced information as much as I did over the last, 45 minutes. So thank you so much for being on the podcast and look forward to talking to you guys soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me over. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharat Varta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.